From 1692 to 1693, 20 people will be executed for the crime of witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts. 200 people in total will be arrested, and of those 200, at least 4 will die in jail. 1692 is really on the tail end of the height of witch trials. The height in Europe was in the mid-1500s to around the 1630s. There were, of course, witch hunts after the 1630s, but they were much more irregular and uncommon than in the past. There was one in Sweden in 1674 where 71 people died in a single day, which was the height of witch trials in that region. And the city of Salzburg in Austria, over the course of 15 years, 139 people will be executed during their witch trials. So how did this happen exactly in Salem? What was the reasoning for it? It's a case of mass hysteria that was heavily influenced by what these people were going through, because this is not a very good time for the people of Salem Village. Epidemics of smallpox were a frequent occurrence throughout New England at this time. In 1692, 500 people died from smallpox there. The American Indian War was also happening during this time. Indian raiding parties attacked the villages throughout Massachusetts less than 2 decades before this time, so understandably this was a stressful period in these people's lives. In 1684, a little less than a decade before the trials, King James II of England revoked the original Massachusetts charter and made Sir Edmund Andros the governor of the Dominion of New England, in which Salem Village was now a part of. Edmund Andros was not very well liked by the people of New England. Andros imposed upon the Old South Meeting House in Boston the worship of Episcopalianism, which was heavily disliked by the largely Puritan residents of Massachusetts. Andros also started to impose a series of laws known as the Navigation Acts upon New England. The Dominion of New England was a short-lived, British-owned American territory covering a sizable portion of the Atlantic coast, including all of Massachusetts. These Navigation Acts put forth new rules upon the American colony, the biggest of which is that the American colony had to go through England to buy certain products, and could no longer sell certain products to other countries. These were products and resources England wanted, so sugar, tobacco, rice, molasses, fur, cotton, and some other items that were rare could not be sold to any other country besides England, and the American colony couldn't also buy certain things like spices, textiles, ironwares from other countries. These laws led to some resentment towards England, and the smuggling of goods started to grow in New England because of these laws. In 1688, King James II of England was overthrown. When word of him getting dethroned reached the people of Boston on April 18, 1689, the colony organized a mob and started arresting many Dominion officials. This would go on to include Edmund Andros. Now, at the time he was in his headquarters in Fort Mary, the mob wanted him to surrender, but he refused, hoping to get onto a British ship called the Rose, which was a British royal ship posted near Boston at this time. That ship, however, would be intercepted by the militia, so he made his way back to Fort Mary. He eventually did surrender, and he was promised his safety, then was arrested. Andros was brought to a council formed by the Boston rebels, and they essentially told Andros that the government was in their hands now. Andros and other Dominion officials were eventually moved to Castle Island. He attempted to escape, making his way to Rhode Island before he was recaptured. 10 months later, Andros and other prisoners were sent back to England and subsequently freed, and the charges against him dropped after the Massachusetts agents in London refused to sign the charges. So leading up to the Salem Witch Trials, there was no real stable form of government. That's one of the reasons the Salem Witch Trials got as far as they did. The witch trials all started in Salem Village, which is a different place than the larger Salem town, but the village still fell under the town's jurisdiction. By the 1670s, a large portion of Salem Village wanted to gain their independence and split off from Salem town. In 1672, they got that opportunity from the court and built their own meeting house, which served as both a church and a sort of civic center where meetings could take place. They had a problem, though, when it came to hiring a minister for the meeting house. They went through 3 different ministers over the course of 15 years. The first was a man named James Bailey, who stayed as minister for 6 years. The second was a man named George Burroughs, who was minister for only 3 years, and he eventually ends up being a victim of the trials and is executed. More on him when we get to the actual trials. The third was a man named Deodat Lawson, who stayed for 4 years and left because the larger church of Salem refused to ordain him. One of the reasons they had such troubles finding a permanent minister was on how exactly to pay them. The fourth minister, and the one most important to the trials, was a man named Samuel Parris. Parris was hired in a somewhat odd way, where they paid 1/3 of his salary on just regular money, then the rest in provisions like food, and they also gave him use of the parsonage, which is a church house that he could live in. The other reasons why they had such a hard time finding a permanent minister was that the town was very divided on many lines. Factions that had developed within the community over the course of many years got much worse as time went on. This included division between families in the village as well. With all of this together, we get to the final thing that makes the Salem Witch Trials possible, and that thing is spiritualism. Spiritualism was very different in this time to these people. Spiritualism at this time in the Puritan religion was unequivocally real. The devil, witches, magic, spirits, all of this was real to them and was treated as such. Making deals with the devil was not only a thing they genuinely believed you can do, but if you did and it was somehow proven you did, it was a crime and you can be tried and convicted and executed by a court of law. And that's one of the things that fascinates me most about these trials. These were treated as legitimate court trials, and with that, everything that a normal trial would entail. So we have documents that were made during this trial, hundreds of them, in detail, including documents of when the accused get questioned. So the accused would be asked a question, then they would respond, and then it went back and forth from the defendant to the prosecution. And we will go over some of those documents as the trial takes place. But now it's time to get into what really sparked the trials, and that would be with the family of Samuel Parris, the town's new minister. In late January of 1692, a small group of girls in Parris's household, including Parris's own daughter, started displaying strange behaviors. It is reported that the girls made strange noises and writhed around on the floor, contorting their bodies. They were unable to speak or pray and claimed that they saw spirits. The town doctor, William Griggs, couldn't find anything physically wrong with them, and the doctor concluded that it must be witchcraft. Nearly all of the afflicted girls came from Samuel Parris's household or the household of his supporter, Thomas Putnam. So this all started with a somewhat close-knit group of girls. When the girls were questioned on who it was who was bewitching them, they gave 3 names. The first was a woman named Sarah Good. Good was a poor woman who was in debt thanks to her first husband, Daniel Pole. Good was a beggar and was known around the village for having a bad temper. The second woman was Sarah Osborne. Sarah Osborne was a rich, somewhat older woman whose husband died less than 2 decades before this time. She was unmarried but was in a relationship with her former servant and hadn't been seen in church for around 3 years due to the fact that she had a long-term illness. The third accused was Samuel Parris's own slave, Tituba. Now there's a bit of confusion about Tituba. She is sometimes portrayed as an African-American witch doctor sort of person. That is almost certainly not true. Every document we have on her during the trial describes her as a Native American, likely from the West Indies. All 3 of them were arrested after the accusations and put through examination on March 1st, 1692. This examination took place in the meeting house, and when they were examined, the girls who first accused them of witchcraft started having fits. They claimed these fits were caused by the supposed witches, and that they were being tormented by them. I'm going to go through bits and pieces of the document for this trial, starting with this one. This is the examination of Sarah Good. This was done in a form of a question and a response sort of thing. So Sarah Good would be asked a question by John Hawthorne. She would respond, then another question, and then another response. So that's how it will be read. This is taken directly from the court document. The examination of Sarah Good before Jonathan Hawthorne and Jonathan Cortwin. Sarah Good, what evil spirits have you familiarity with? Sarah Good replies, none. Hawthorne asks, have you made no contact with the devil? Good answered, no. Why do you hurt these children? I do not hurt them. I scorn it. Who do you employ then to do it? I employ nobody. What creature do you employ then? No creature, but I am falsely accused. Why do you go away muttering from Mr. Parris's house? I do not mutter, but I thanked him for what he gave my child. Have you made no contract with the devil? No. The children all looked upon her, and see if this were the person that had hurt them, and so they did all look upon her, and said this was the one persons that had tormented them. Presently they were all tormented. Sarah Good, do you not see now what you have done? Why do you not tell us the truth? Why do you thus torment these poor children? I do not torment them. Who do you employ then? I employ nobody. I scorn it. How come they thus tormented? What do I know? You bring the others here, and now you charge me with it? Why? Who was it? I do not know, but it was some you brought into the meeting house with you. We brought you to the meeting house. But you brought in 2 more. Who was it then that tormented the children? It was Osborne. What is it you say when you go muttering away from that person's house? If I must tell, I will tell. Do tell us then. If I must tell, I will. It is the commandments. I may say my commandments, I hope. What commandments is it? If I must tell you, I will. It's a psalm. What psalm? After a long time she muttered over some parts of a psalm. Who do you serve? I serve God. What God do you serve? The God that made heaven and the earth. Though she was not willing to mention the word God, her answers were in a very wicked, spiteful manner, reflecting and retorting against the authority with base and abusive words, and many lies she was taken in. It was here said that her husband had said that he was afraid that she either was a witch or would very quickly become one. But it was her bad marriage to him, and indeed he say with tears that she is an enemy to all good. Sorry if that was a bit hard to follow, but it shows by the start of the trials, the accused were already accusing others. In that document, Sarah Good explicitly names Sarah Osborne as a witch, and Sarah Good's own husband wasn't even convinced she wasn't a witch. The next document is a short one from Elizabeth Hubbard, who is one of the afflicted girls, and she describes what supposedly Sarah Osborne has done to her. I saw the apparition of Sarah Osborne, who did most grievously torment me by pricking and pinching me most dreadfully, and she so continued hurting me most grievously until the 1st of March, 1692, and also several times since Sarah Osborne had afflicted me and urged me to write in her book. Her book means like a black book, a witch's book sort of thing. But you can tell just from the offset of the trials, apparitions are brought up and will be used as evidence throughout the trials. This spectral evidence will be used to convict a lot of people. It was argued that the devil used apparitions, but couldn't make an apparition of a specific person unless that person specifically made a deal with the devil. So that proved a connection to the devil, which is the important part. There had to be proof for a death sentence to be made. Spectral evidence is the thing that starts the trials, and eventually it will be the thing that ends them. Of the 3 initially accused, though, one of them confesses, and that person would be Tituba, the Paris's Native American slave. Now, what is important to note about this confession is that it is almost assuredly not genuine at all on Tituba's part. Tituba denied being a witch initially, but was beaten into a confession by Samuel Paris. Tituba confessed at first to making something called a witch's cake for Samuel Paris's daughter and her friends. When the girls started having the fits before the trials, Mary Sibley, who was the neighbor of the Paris's family, suggested the idea to make this witch's cake to see if it was in fact witchcraft that was harming these girls. Making the witch's cake involved making a cake with urine of the afflicted girls and then feeding it to the Paris's dog, and that would reveal any possible witchcraft. Mary Sibley would also be put on trial for the suggestion of making this witch's cake. Samuel Paris, during the trial, said that this use of witchcraft, trying to root out witchcraft, was going to the devil for help against the devil. Mary would be banned from communion until she later confessed and was eventually forgiven by the community. After Tituba's confession, Ann Putnam, who was one of the girls who first made the witch accusations, said this in court, and this reads very similar to what Sarah Osborne was accused of. I saw the apparition of Tituba, Mr. Paris's Indian woman, which did torture me most grievously by pricking and pinching me most dreadfully till the 1st day of March, beginning the day of her examination, and then also most grievously at the beginning of her examination. But since she confessed, she has hurt me but little. This description of what Tituba supposedly did to them is extremely similar to the one made against Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. Nevertheless, Tituba then made a more detailed confession about her witchcraft. And remember, she was being beaten into this confession by her owner Samuel Paris, and English didn't appear to be her first language. The second confession had so much detail in it that it's split into 2 parts, adding up to 7 pages in total. And it is an almost stereotypical witch story. She confesses to riding on a pole with both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne to a witches' meeting in Boston. She talked about a shape-shifting dog that spoke to her, all kinds of things. I'm just going to go over a small portion of it, but all these documents are available online and you can read them in detail if you'd want. This is part of the Examination of Tituba by John Hawthorne. Hawthorne starts, Tituba, what evil spirits have you familiarity with? Tituba replies, none. Hawthorne, why do you hurt these children? I do not hurt them. Who is it then? The devil? The devil for aught I can know. Do you never see the devil? The devil come to me and bid me serve him. Who have you seen? 4 women, and they sometimes hurt the children. Who were they? Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good, and I do not know who the others were. Sarah Good and Osborne would have me hurt the children, but I would not. She further saith that there was a tall man from Boston. That's what she did see. When did you see them? Last night in Boston. What did you say when they said hurt the children, and did you hurt them? No, there was 4 women and 1 man, and they say hurt the children, and lay all upon her, and they tell me if I will not hurt the children, then they will hurt me. But did you not hurt them? Yes, but I will hurt them no more. Are you not sorry you did hurt them? Yes. And why then do you hurt them? They say hurt the children, or we will do worse to you. So in that confession, Tituba specifically names both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as being witches, along with going with her to meet other witches in Boston. Next is a small document that is Sarah Good's response to being implicated of witchcraft by Tituba. This is from the examination document for Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. She saith that she did do them no harm. She saith that she hath made no contract or covenant. She saith that she never did hurt the children. She saith that she never had familiarity with the devil. She saith that she had no hand in hurting the children. She saith she is more likely bewitched than a witch. She saith that she would never believe the devil. The court didn't believe Sarah Good, and she will be put in jail. Before moving on, though, I want to give a few more snippets from Tituba's confession. Some of the good bits about meeting spirits and communicating with talking cats and riding on broomsticks. This is the last big document I'm going to read, but again, they're all online, so if you want more details, you can find them and read them pretty easily. This is part of Tituba's examination by Magistrate Jonathan Corwin, and this is done in a question and response sort of format, kind of like the other one. Starting with Jonathan Corwin. What other likenesses beside a man hath appeared to you? Sometimes like a hog, sometimes like a great black dog, 4 times. What did they say unto you? They told me serve him. That was the black dog. I told him I was afraid. He told me he would do worse to me. What did you say to him after that? I answer, I will serve you no longer. He told me then he would hurt me. What other creatures have you seen? A bird. What bird? A little yellow bird. Where doth it keep? With a man who hath many pretty things here besides. What other pretty things? He hath not showed them yet unto me, but he said he would show me them tomorrow, and he told me if I would serve him, I should have the bird. What other creatures did you see? I saw 2 cats. One red, the other black, and as big as a little dog. What did the cats do? I don't know. I've seen them only 2 times. What did they say? They said serve them. When did you see them? I saw them last night. Did they do anything to hurt you or threaten you? They did scratch me. When? After prayer, and scratched me, because I would not serve them, and when they went away, I could not see, but they stood before the fire. What service did they expect from you? They say more to hurt the children. How do you pinch them when you hurt them? The other pull me and haul me to pinch the children, and I am very sorry for it. A little later on in the confession, it reads, Have you seen Good or Osborne ride on a pole? Yes, and have held fast by me. I was not at Mr. Gregg's but once, but it may be send something like me. Neither I have gone, but that they tell me they will hurt me. Last night they tell me I must kill somebody with a knife. Who were they told you so? Sarah Good and Osborne. They would have me killed Thomas Putnam's child last night. Of the initial 3 arrested, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, Sarah Good will be executed on July 19th, 1692. Sarah Osborne will die in jail on May 10th of the same year. Tituba, who would later take back her confession, would be put in jail, and about a year later, her jail fees would be paid by a new owner, and she would be released from jail. After she was released, we have no real records on where she went or what happened to her. Tituba's confession and the fact that she named both Sarah Good and Osborne as fellow witches gave the people of Salem a sort of validation for the trials. But the girls' fits and symptoms didn't stop, and they started accusing more people of witchcraft. Some of these accused were respected members of the community, including a 70-year-old frail woman named Rebecca Nurse. When Nurse was in trial, she proclaimed her innocence before the court. When Rebecca Nurse would move her hand or neck, the afflicted girls who were in the court started having violent fits and seizures. To the prosecution, this was damning evidence against the accused, and these fits brought on by the supposed witches were used throughout the trials to convict many of the trial's victims. The girls would eventually go on to accuse people from outside Salem Village. This included George Burroughs, the town's previous minister who had since moved to Maine. George Burroughs was said to be very athletic and strong, and in his trials it is his strength that is pointed to as a pact with the devil. They argued that no one is normally as strong as he was unless they had made a deal with the devil. He would be hung on August 19th. This goes to show that no one was really off limits when it came to the accusations. Women were the most accused, about 75% of the accused were women, but men were not safe from the accusations either. The use of spectral evidence had continued to be used to convict people, and the use of spectral evidence still included apparitions, but also included such things as the witch's mark, which was really just a birthmark or a mole, but the court argued that familiars, which were like supernatural beings that would assist witches, left these birthmarks behind, and were evidence of the familiars getting nourishment from the witch's body. Now, not everyone agreed on the use of spectral evidence, but its use continued even after the accusations grew more numerous and spread further. Nearing the end of May, the accused kept getting more and more numerous. The amount of accused individuals in custody was 62. At this time, Massachusetts still lacked a form of legal government. Increase Mather, who was the minister for the larger Salem town, was in England trying to get a new charter for Massachusetts. When he got back to Massachusetts on May 14th, he had a new charter and a new governor, William Phipps. Phipps did not like how the trials were going, but didn't necessarily disagree with them in their entirety, and he created a 9-member court to continue the trial. This was the Court of Oyer and Termine, which translates to hear and to determine. The people appointed to oversee this court had no real official legal training, and the court trials kept going on spectral evidence, and they would continue to execute people off of it. The first person tried by this new court was a woman named Bridget Bishop. She pleaded innocent, but was found guilty, and on June 10th, she was hung at Gallows Hill, which was where all the hangings took place. There was also an increased number of people who started to confess to witchcraft. All of the people who were executed during the trials were people who pleaded innocent and then were proven guilty. Some of those who confessed were not killed during the trials. There was a sort of belief going around that if you confessed, you would be spared from execution. This was definitely not true, and if the trials continued as they were, the confessed witches would almost assuredly have been executed. The reason they weren't immediately executed was because it was believed that a confessed witch should have the time to come to terms with their evil doing and seek forgiveness with God, and then eventually they would be executed for their crimes. But these confessed witches bought themselves enough time that the trials eventually ended and they would be released. Of all the people executed during the trial, there was only one person that was not executed by hanging, and that was Giles Corey. Giles Corey was 81 years old, and he was executed after refusing to plead guilty or not guilty. They tried to make him enter a plea by pressing him. They put him on the ground and put a large board on top of him. They then added stones on top of the board. They kept adding stones trying to get him to plead innocent or guilty, but he refused. They kept doing this for 3 entire days, and he still refused to plead innocent or guilty. At the 3rd day, though, he died, and his wife would eventually also be executed during the trials. Eventually, the nearby town of Andover would be brought into the trials when the constable living there invited the afflicted girls over to see if they could figure out what was afflicting his wife. There were people in Andover who were accused and confessed, hoping not to be hung, because again, only those who pleaded innocent and were then found guilty so far were executed, so they thought this might help them. In August 1692, there are 5 people who are killed. In September, 8 people will be executed. And used to convict some of these people was something called a touch test, which as described by one of the accused went something like this. We were blindfolded and our hands were laid upon the afflicted persons. They began in their fits and falling into their fits at our coming unto their presence, as they said. Some led us and laid our hands upon them. They said that they were well, and we were guilty of afflicting them, whereupon we were all seized as prisoners. October 1692 is when it effectively comes to an end. The afflicted girl started naming more prominent members of the community, including the governor's own wife. The minister, Increase Mathers, then advised the court to no longer use spectral evidence and accept only direct confession from the accused in order to get a conviction. This throwing out of spectral evidence is what effectively ends the trials. Many of those who confessed recanted their statements, and because those statements often didn't directly mention the devil, they couldn't be prosecuted. On October the 12th, the governor put an end to the proceedings, and a few days later the Court of Oyer and Termine was dissolved. The new Supreme Court continued the trials for the already accused in January of 1693. 3 more people were found guilty by this new court, but the governor pardoned them all and released everyone by the end of May. And that's where the trials are officially ended. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Trepidation. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the Salem Witch Trials. I know some of that 1600s language can be kind of hard to follow, and it was just as hard to read. If you have any dark historical topics you think would be a good fit for the show, you can let me know on Twitter @TrepidationPod, and I'll look into them and maybe even make them an episode. If you stay tuned on that page, I'll be giving updates on the podcast and letting you know how future episodes are shaping up. And I'm open to topics from any time period, so long as they're of a somewhat darker tone. If you did like the episode, telling me you did on Twitter is the best way I have to know people are liking it, and will encourage me to get new episodes out. Background music is Dewdrop Fantasy from Kevin MacLeod. Thank you all for listening, and have a great day.